Good evening, Chicago, and welcome back to Little City TV. I'm your host, Lisa Reyes, and Little City TV, if you don't already know, is the only live autism awareness show in Chicago. As you know, April is Autism Awareness Month, and autism spectrum disorder is the fastest growing developmental disability affecting our nation, growing at an astounding 1,148% growth rate. Last week we mentioned that 1 in 110 American children are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, and 1 in 63 children in Illinois have a developmental disability like autism. So tonight, to help to continue the dialogue, to help generate more autism awareness, and to help answer some of your questions, we're delighted to welcome Dr. Mark Holzberg to the program. Dr. Mark Holzberg owns more than 40 years of progressive, responsible experience in public and private multidisciplinary service delivery programs. He is responsible for agency, community, and statewide program development and service delivery systems. He currently provides consultation to the Clinical Services and Professional Development Division at the Division of Children and Family Services of Illinois around strategic planning, program design, and implementation. He is also responsible for the development and implementation of the statewide Trauma-Informed Practices Program, which seeks to develop a unique trauma-informed child welfare program, including the provision of evidence-based interventions for identified clients. Dr. Holzberg also holds private practice and provides consultation to state agencies, community providers, and university and medical centers. He also makes recommendations for in-depth program developments, needs assessments, and assists in developing and implementing service programs. He has developed program evaluation and research protocols for statewide multi-site agency programs. Quite a mouthful, but yes. Definitely delighted to have Dr. Holzberg here on our show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Dr. Holzberg, what can you tell the people of Chicago in terms of supporting children with autism? What can the people of Chicago do to support kids in their community who have autism?
The biggest things I would advocate for is to push for inclusion of the children who are in the communities in programs, to be strong advocates for the families and for the children, and to read about autism. There's a tremendous amount of literature that's now currently available both at bookstores and especially on the internet that can give a basic education around the needs of autistic individuals with autism. The advocacy and inclusion of children in the community, I would recommend, is the two highest.
That's wonderful.
Two greatest things.
And if we have parents tonight who have children with autism, do you have any advice for them? Or anything?
Well, I always have advice.
Please share it with our audience.
That's one thing I had. I've been in the field a number of years, and there's a few things I've learned along the way about working with individuals with disabilities and children who have autism. And the key element that I've learned is that parents have an intuitive sense of what is going on with their child. They often have as much information or knowledge about what is going on as the professional who is working with the child. And what they need to do is to be confident that they can communicate their knowledge of their child. Another thing I've learned relative to parents is that with all the so-called experts out there, it can be very, very confusing about what to believe, what to accept, what to do with your child. And I guess the advice I would offer is most of us, including myself, who claim to be experts, and I do not feel I am, need to be humble in the face of the parent who lives with the child day in and day out, and not to accept what we say at face value, but to challenge it, to demand explanations, to demand an understanding of why we're saying what we're saying. Another key truth that I've arrived at is none of us really have all the truth about autism. There are so many different theories about the causes of autism. There are so many different technologies and intervention strategies that have been proposed that you could go absolutely crazy trying to figure out which one is the best one for my child. The only thing I would ask of parents is, regardless of who you're working with at a professional level, make sure that what they're talking about with you in terms of the assessment, the intervention, the education is tailored to the needs of your child and not some conceptual framework that you have no understanding about. The final piece of advice, if you will, is to be a very, very strong advocate for your child. And this is a theme I will bring up throughout our discussion tonight. Parents need to understand that the vast majority of federal, state, and local legislation, funding for programs, and program development was the result of parental agitation and advocacy, not professionals like myself. Parents have been the driving force in obtaining the needed services for children, and they should continue to do so.
I like that, agitation and advocacy. It's a good word. What, in your professional opinion, what do you feel are some of the biggest challenges right now in the world of autism?
Well, there's a large number. One of them, which I've been struck with over the last number of years, is that many of the children who have autism or who have other disabilities also have what we call co-occurring mental health or behavioral problems. Mm-hmm. The notion that what we're dealing with is a youngster or adult who has a neurodevelopmental disorder that results in impaired language and social skills, while that's accurate, what we're also finding is many of these children and adults also have fairly significant behavioral problems, which can be very, very demanding on the caregivers, on the teachers, on the therapists. And it presents an issue in terms of programming, because most programming is what we call categorical. It's by label. So if you're labeled with autism, you'll go into a classroom with autistic children. If you're labeled as behavior disordered, you'll go into a BD classroom, and very often the teachers are not trained cross-categorically to understand the nuances of both, and that is a major problem. Another problem which has been sort of under the surface, but I think is getting more and more acknowledged, is the fact that these individuals with autism do not have the same kind of coordinated, integrated medical care that we want. And I noticed that we had a caller. Did you want me to break off
if
here?
You don't mind.
We can break off here and come back.
Okay, great. Looks like we have our first caller. Caller, go ahead. You're on the air.
Yes, Mark. I read about you in a news release about tonight's show, that you're the Director of Research for Behavioral Health Services at Southern Illinois.
Yes.
And I was wondering if there's any interesting or recent findings that you care to share with us.
Well, that research is done under the auspices of the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. It is a cooperative program that is looking at research related to what we call the Integrated Assessment Program, which is the front-end program for children entering the child welfare system, and it's a behavioral health psychological screening that's given to all the children. And one of the interesting findings, which is sort of confirming what had been anecdotally noted in the literature for a number of years, is about 50% of the children entering child welfare enter with some form of either diagnosed or undiagnosed mental health or developmental problem. The rates of developmental disabilities for children entering into foster care is much higher than in the general population, which speaks to the difficulties often that parents have in terms of providing care for these children. So that would be, I think, the key finding from a result level. The other finding, which is just beginning to emerge, is that the individuals who do the assessments as part of this program are clamoring for additional training related to developmental disabilities and mental health issues. What they're finding is that often their training at the universities, their internships, and their postdoctoral work did not actually prepare them to work with children and families who actually have the problems. And what they're saying is we need additional training. So those are the two areas that I've been working on recently.
Great. And I think we have another caller. Caller, go ahead. You're on the air.
Yes, good evening, Mark. I was hoping you might be able to explain to me why some autistic children can speak and others cannot.
That's a very interesting question and a good question. One of the things that many of us have said over the years is that children with autism present, by and large, with very, very similar kinds of difficulties that would lead us to believe that they have exactly the same etiology or cause for the disorder. But what we're finding from the research, and I think parents are certainly aware of this, is that the reason for why the kids are behaving the way they're behaving in terms of their autism adaptation often is very different. There are genetic reasons, there are neurodevelopmental reasons, there are perhaps exposure to toxins, which is a new thing, and each of those risk factors potentially could cause the brain to develop in a different manner, leading one to be able to verbalize, whereas another child would not be able to verbalize. Does that respond to your question?
I think we dropped them after.
Okay.
So we were talking about some of the biggest challenges facing the world of autism, and you were talking about the second.
Okay. I was referring to the problem with developing and providing a integrated and coordinated healthcare system for individuals with developmental disabilities and individuals with autism. What we have found is that many of the individuals with autism also have secondary medical problems that require subspecialty services. They have higher rates of seizures than the general population, pediatric population at least. There's anecdotal evidence, but no real firm research to indicate that they have gastrointestinal disorders. We do know they have sensory integrative problems at a higher level. And I think we got cut off again with another caller.
All right,
We'll come back to that one again.
Okay. Caller, go ahead. You're on the air.
Hi, I'm a stay-at-home mother of a child with autism, and I'd like to know your opinion. Do you see services getting better for our children here in Illinois? Because we rank at the very bottom of the list for funding, and certain services are being cut for our children. Is there any hope for our kids here in Illinois?
The short answer is no. And I apologize for saying that. There's been an inverse relationship that's evolved over the last 15 to 20 years as our knowledge, both at a professional level and at a familial family level about autism has increased. The availability of federal and state funds have decreased, and so that the ability for us to provide the programs that we want for our children and for our adult children have not kept pace with our understanding of the disorder and the needs that these individuals have. Given our current economic crisis and the lack of will to provide any kind of taxes in the state, I think it's very problematic that those state agencies that are charged with providing services such as DHSDD and the State Board of Ed are going to have the resources to increase the kinds of programming that we all know are needed.
And if I may add to that, I'm Director of Communications for Little City Foundation, and one of the things that we try to do at Little City is get the parents involved, get the community involved, get the newspapers involved, so that we can talk and convince our legislators. I know Governor Quinn has proposed a new budget, and one of the first cuts is to the Department of Human Services, one of the major cuts. So, it is very problematic, and it is very discouraging, but I would ask you not to lose hope and to really just rally as many people as you know, as many coworkers, neighbors, friends, and family, and contact your legislator, contact the editors of your local newspapers, and really let's start the dialogue, let's start agitating the lawmakers to make sure we get what we need.
I'm a firm believer in class action suits. Since the early 1970s, class action suits have been a fundamental tactic, if you will, in the arena of obtaining needed services both for individuals with mental health problems and individuals with developmental problems. As I mentioned earlier in my introduction, if you will, the advocacy of parents is something that we cannot underestimate. Rallying in Springfield, rallying at other areas of the state can only bring pressure on our representatives.
I agree wholeheartedly. And to that statistic, for those viewers of you who are just learning a little bit more about autism, and thank you for watching. Illinois is actually ranked last in the country after the District of Columbia, so we're 51st,
Well, see, I didn't know
including the
that.
District of Columbia, when it comes to supporting residential communities for people with developmental disabilities. And we rank 40th overall in the nation when it comes to just general funding for children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So quite a shame. We can do a lot better as the 5th wealthiest state.
Right.
I know we have a huge deficit, but we can still do a lot better.
Right.
All right, so you were talking about...
Again, for the third time. Maybe I'll wrap it up. Anyways, so without making too much to do about the medical issues, we do know that individuals with developmental disabilities and individuals with autism often have associated medical conditions that require what we call subspecialty care, neurology, orthopedics, things like that. And historically, there has not been an integrated mechanism for the family doctor, the primary care physician, to access those services and to case manage those services. One of the things Little City, parenthetically, is trying to do, and they've been working on this for a couple of years, is to develop a medical clinic model that actually links with 2 different hospitals in the northwest suburbs, the Alexian Brothers and Northwest Community Hospital, to provide that integrated medical services for both primary care and for follow-up longitudinal care, subspecialty care. So that's an exciting activity that Little City is doing. The third challenge that we're facing is that we have an aging population, if you will. The children I worked with 30 years ago have now grown up. Families are facing issues of estate planning, guardianship, long-term medical care, long-term physical care for their young adult or their adult client. And what we're finding is many of the adult individuals with developmental disabilities and autism also are experiencing the same age-related physical disorders. They may be, the onset may be earlier than for the population of 70s. They may be getting some of the problems in their mid-50s, but nevertheless, there is a geriatric host of geriatric-related aging population issues that we have to deal with.
Yeah, incredible.
And that's a major problem.
So autism spectrum disorder, doctor, is called, one of a mysterious disorder, hence the puzzle pieces, its national symbol and so forth. Do you have any personal theories on autism or care to hypothesize on the prevalence?
Yeah,
just curious.
Let me suggest that there's certainly enough theories out there that I don't need to add my own theory to this one. But I was struck when you asked me the other day that this might be a topic that we were talking about. I went to the web, and I found a website that sort of listed the various theories that are out there, and it sort of illustrates how confusing this can be for families, let alone for the professionals. One of the questions, does vaccine cause autism? Is autism genetic? Is autism caused by bad parenting? Is autism caused by atypical brain development? Is autism caused by immune deficiency, etc.? Is it caused by food allergies? Is it caused by poor nutrition?
Oh my God.
Exactly, and I'm sure the list could go on and on and on. In fact, we don't know what's quote-unquote causes autism. We do know, or we do think that there are multiple causes of autism. Some of them are genetic. Some are neurodevelopmental that cause autism. There's a speculative theory now that I'm sort of leaning towards believing that if you look at the astronomical increase in the incidence of autism over the last 10 years, people have been positing that what we're dealing with is increased environmental toxins. There have been increase in asthma, increase in diabetes, and the feeling is that this is related to exposure of community toxins, specifically various plastics that we wrap our foods and other material in, apparently contain certain kinds of chemicals that are highly toxic and can cause prenatal damage. And the feeling is this may be one of the contributing factors to the increase in incidence. But I think it's safe to say there is no one cause of autism, and anybody who professes to say that there is one cause is really missing out on a lot of the other evidence that's out there.
Well, we really appreciate all the work that you're doing in the field for all of this. I did read an article recently last year, and maybe you can can help enlighten me, that people with Asperger's and high-functioning autism actually make great software testers. Have you heard this?
No.
It was one positive comment that I wanted to bring to light about people with autism.
But I think you raise a point. There are a number of individuals who have had Asperger's or autism who are what we would professionally say are higher functioning, who in fact have a lot of skills. And I think one of the opportunities that's emerged over the last 10 years or so is an awareness that most of us in the professional class have tended to look at autism from a pathology model. There's a deficit here, there's something we have to work on to ameliorate.
You're looking at the disability.
We're looking at the disability.
Whereas,
and the advocacy of the parents and others have taught us that many of these individuals bring unique sets of gifts
and abilities,
and that we need to do a better job of understanding these things. There's a professor at Illinois State University, Jim Thompson, who actually is developing a scale to be used that does not measure deficits, but only measures what the supports are.
That.
And in fact, the American Association of Mental Retardation and others are working with him to use that nationally. So I think we're moving in the right direction.
I think so. It's kind of just like people first language. It's not the disabled, it's a person with a disability, because the disability does not define the individual.
Right.
Totally. So that's good to know, because I know a lot of parents that come to Little City often wonder about their younger child and what their younger child is going to do as they become a young adult. And it's nice to see the vocational programs that are in place for young adults with autism, and with their schooling. There are a lot of things that they can do with their unique abilities.
Yeah, I mean there was a time when I was much younger than I am now, working at Michael Reese Hospital when it actually existed at the Developmental Institute. Our director told us a story how this would have gone back into the 60s. When she had finished evaluating a youngster at our evaluation clinic, she was very frustrated about what kinds of plans could be made for this kid long term. And one of the pediatricians at the hospital said, "Dr. Abrams, just counsel the parents to put the kid in an institution, and God bless him." I mean, that was the extent of our thinking back in the 50s and the 60s.
Right.
So to an extent, we have come a tremendous way. Our kids are now much better integrated, more integrated into the community. However, we still have a long way to go.
We do.
Yeah.
We do. If you weren't able to get your question on Little City TV tonight, we invite you to visit the Little City website and at www.littlecity.org, and feel free to email info@littlecity.org, and we will get your questions to Dr. Mark Holzberg. Or you can call us directly at 847-221-7825. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Dr. Holzberg.